Who is responsible for Romeo and Juliet's death?
Ooh. You know what? Can I ever so slightly change that? Because I think it's more what was responsible, and I think it's the family feud. It hangs over everything. Like almost every character decision that's made, except for maybe Romeo and Juliet's, obviously, but almost everything is influenced by the feud that exists. This unknown feud that no one ever really says anything about what it is or makes any attempt to resolve at any point. It hangs over everything and it affects every character's decision. And I think that more than anything.
Yeah, 100%. Like thinking about specifically just because of Juliet and playing her, what her intentions are. Like, yes, she falls in love with Romeo, but everything she does is because she's aware of this feud. She can't tell her parents she's married to Romeo. If she could, that would have solved a lot of problems. But instead, she has to go to all of these extremes in order to protect that relationship. So I 100% agree. They would not have ended up dead, in my opinion, had the feud not been influencing everything. I do think there are a couple of other kind of rogue elements that have an impact, the kind of circumstances, but also, if we think about it, for me, the big turning point is Act 3, Scene 1, when Mercutio fights Tybalt. And yes, Tybalt has come in, but for me, it's Mercutio, because Mercutio could step away from that fight, and he doesn't. And instead, that fight just is the opening of just this terrible kind of, people dying, and Romeo ended up being a murderer as well. And I also think Friar John did not deliver the letter, and I think we can all relate to the fact that he was stopped by a pestilence, a pandemic, and he was quarantined and couldn't get the letter.
Absolutely.
So I think thinking about that, if he'd got the letter to Romeo, happily ever after, maybe.
It's so hard to put individual responsibility on something, because then it becomes, where do you draw the line? Because Capulet forcing Juliet to get married just massively accelerates the timeline at the end, and where do you draw back to that? Like, Benvolio invited Romeo to the party, why, at what point do you draw that line?
There.
Having said that, that's it.
Benvolio is innocent.
There.
Having said that, I think a personification of the feud is Tybalt. Tybalt is actually really the only character driving violence in the show, actually driving the violence. Even when the Montagues are in the Capulet ball, Capulet is like, it's chill, just let them be, let them find it. It's always Tybalt, apart from Abraham and stuff at the start, but a main character who just won't let it go and is constantly hungry for a fight and looking for a fight and upholding that family honour, so much so that he'll challenge Romeo if he comes to the party, and even fight Mercutio is not even directly in the feud. She is the driver of the violence in it, and without that fight, that is a monumental changing point in the trajectory of their...
They're a product of the feud, though, I believe.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, what would Tybalt do with that aggression and whatnot if it didn't have them hanging over? I don't think he'd fight Romeo. I don't think he'd care who turned up at the parties that the Montagues would be invited to. It would be fine. And it's all because of this unknowing prejudice from one family to the other for reasons that just aren't ever enunciated. It's maddening. I'm assuming it's generational. Does anybody else ever get that vibe, that it's something that's gone on for literally generations and nobody even remembers themselves what this feud's for? It's just there. It's preposterous.
What about you, Jessie? What do you think?
I think the students really were overwhelmingly in favour of the fact that it was the friar's fault. And I do agree with them to an extent, because it's his advice, the advice he gives Romeo, and to an extent the advice he gives Juliet, that really does kind of set into motion these happenings. He tells Romeo to go to Mantua, and then he gives Juliet the potion that's going to make her sleep, and then he trusts Friar John for some reason. But Romeo really does have his... he kind of goes on the rampage towards the end. He does hold his share of blame. No matter how you can sympathise with Romeo for the fact that he is avenging his friend Mercutio, he kills Tybalt. He continues to kill. He kills Paris, and there's really, by the end of it, there's really no positive outcome for Romeo. But that does again kind of go back to this feud that's hanging over the pair of them.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a collective responsibility in some way, because, and between Romeo and Juliet, like Fry's line, wisely and slow, they stumble, they run fast, pretty much sums up the whole play, because no one stops to just actually wait a second and go,
Even
hold
the
on a
Friar.
sec. Even the Friar.
Even the Friar.
Can't
Yes,
trust it, yeah.
let's marry you right now. Come on, use your own advice. You're right.
Yeah.
If somebody had just listened to that, including Friar Lawrence, everything would have been okay.
Maybe.